7:10 in the evening. Plesetsk Cosmodrome, Northern Russia. An RS-28 Sarmat heavy intercontinental ballistic missile was already clearing its launch canister in a cloud of cold-launched gas. This was not a scheduled test flight. The trajectory was not aimed at the high arcs of the Pacific test ranges. It was aimed west. The massive booster ignited, a pillar of white fire against the darkening subarctic sky. Within seconds, it was accelerating through 30,000 feet. The sheer weight of the missile, over 200 metric tons, made the ground shake for miles around the silo. This was the largest weapon in the Russian arsenal. It was designed to carry 10 heavy nuclear warheads, but tonight, it was carrying something else. 7:12 in the evening. Buckley Space Force Base, Colorado. Inside the darkened operations floor, the space-based infrared system detected the heat signature. A technician watched a single bright pixel bloom on his monitor. It was an infrared flare so intense it could only be a large-scale ballistic launch. The technician spoke quickly. Contact. Thermal bloom detected at Plesetsk, Sector 442. A senior officer leaned over the console. Confirming signature. That is a heavy lift. We have a booster ignition. This is not a satellite launch. The heat profile is too high. The officer turned to the communications array. Notify the North American Aerospace Defense Command. We have a hot launch at Plesetsk. Type is likely an RS-28. 7:13 in the evening. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. The warning reached the mountain in seconds. On the main display, a red line began to crawl across the globe. It started in northern Russia and moved toward the Arctic Circle. But the line was not climbing into the deep black of outer space. It was flattening out. A strategic analyst adjusted his headset. Trajectory is anomalous. The missile is not entering a standard ballistic arc. It is leveling off at 100 kilometers. The commander of the watch stood up. Explain that. Is it a failure? Negative, sir, the analyst replied. The thrust is sustained. It is skimming the top of the atmosphere. It is maintaining a constant altitude. If it stays on this track, it will reach the European coast in 4 minutes. The commander looked at the board. What is the warhead count? Unknown. The shroud is still intact, but computers cannot calculate an impact point. At this altitude, it can maneuver. It could hit anything from London to Washington. 7:15 in the evening. The atmosphere at the Combat Information Center was free, but the men and women at the consoles were sweating. The first missile was now traveling at Mach 20. It was a spear of hot plasma cutting through the thin air of the ionosphere. Behind it, on the radar screens, at the edges of the Russian border, 3 new heat blooms appeared. A radar operator called out. 3 additional launches. Same location, same trajectory. The commander of the watch grabbed the secure line to the Pentagon. This is Cheyenne Mountain. We have 4 heavy missiles in the air. They are skimming the atmosphere on a western heading. We cannot classify the warheads. We are moving to a heightened alert state. The room fell into a tense, mechanical rhythm. Outside the mountain, the world was still going about its business. People were eating dinner, they were driving home. They had no idea that 4 of the most powerful weapons ever built were currently screaming across the roof of the sky. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:16 in the evening. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex. The massive steel blast doors had already been sealed. Deep underground, the air was filtered and recycled. But the atmosphere inside the command center was heavy, with a different kind of pressure. Every screen showed the same 4 red lines. They were moving across the top of the world. They were not following the predictable, mathematical curves of a standard ballistic flight. The tracking officer stared at his console. Contact 1 is crossing the 72nd parallel. Speed is Mach 21. Altitude is stable at 98 kilometers. The plasma wake is blooming. It is creating a massive radar return. We are losing fine track resolution. The commander of the watch stood behind him. Is it maneuvering? Small corrections only, sir, the officer replied. It is staying right on the edge of the atmosphere. It is using the thin air for lift. This is a skip glide profile. It is staying too low for our mid-course interceptors and too high for our terminal defenses. The commander knew what that meant. The standard defense systems were designed for missiles that went into space. These missiles were staying in the basement. They were flying in the gap where the American shield was thinnest. 7:18 in the evening, the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. The National Military Command Center was in a state of controlled chaos. Generals and admirals were moving toward the primary conference table. Secure lines were humming with activity. On the main wall, the Russian missiles were now passing north of Norway. The Secretary of Defense took his seat. He looked at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "What are we looking at, General?" "4 RS-28 boosters, Mr. Secretary," the general said. "They launched from Plesetsk 5 minutes ago. They are on a non-standard trajectory. We call it an atmospheric skim. It allows the warhead to stay below most long-range radar horizons until the last possible second. It also makes the final target unpredictable." "Are they nuclear?" the secretary asked. "We have to assume they are," the general replied. "But there is something strange. The thermal signature from the nose cones is fluctuating. They are emitting a specific frequency. It is not a standard telemetry signal. It is a wide-spectrum pulse. It is almost like they want us to see them." 7:21 in the evening, a secure communications bunker near Moscow. Colonel Viktor Volkov watched the telemetry from the lead missile. His face was pale in the glow of the green monitors. He was a professional. He had spent 20 years preparing for a war he hoped would never happen. Now, he was the man holding the leash on 4 of the most destructive objects ever created. An officer sat next to him. The Americans have moved to a high alert status. Their radar stations in Alaska and Greenland are at full power. They are tracking the lead glider. "Good," Volkov said. His voice was a low rasp. "They need to see it. If they do not see it, the message is lost. If they see it too late, they will react with everything they have." "Sir?" the officer whispered. "The gliders are approaching the release point. Should we initiate the secondary sequence?" Volkov looked at the countdown. "Not yet. Let them sweat. Let them wonder why we are not aiming for their cities. Let them feel the weight of what is above them." The gliders were now crossing the Norwegian Sea. They were silent. They were invisible to the naked eye. But to the sensors of the most powerful military on Earth, they were 4 screaming ghosts. The dread was no longer a possibility. It was a physical presence in every command center from Moscow to Washington. The first contact was over. The escalation was beginning. 7:22 in the evening. Vardø, Norway. The Globus 3 radar station sat on a frozen hilltop overlooking the Barents Sea. It was the most sensitive electronic eye in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Inside the reinforced concrete structure, the radar arrays were screaming. The massive dish was locked onto the first wave of missiles from Plesetsk. The senior technician watched the data stream. It was a mess of electronic noise. The plasma wakes surrounding the missiles were so hot they were reflecting radar waves in every direction. It was like trying to track a mirror in a hall of mirrors. The technician keyed his headset. "Command, this is Vardø. We have firm track on the first 4 contacts. But we have a problem. The signature is expanding. It is not just 4 warheads. Each missile is deploying decoys or sub-munitions. The sky over the Norwegian Sea is filling with debris." The duty officer responded. "Can you identify the payload?" "Negative. But they are staying high. Too high for an impact in Western Europe. If they were going for London or Paris, they would be starting their descent now. They are staying at 100 kilometers. They are riding the edge." 7:24 in the evening. The Dombarovsky Missile Field, southern Siberia. In the desolate grasslands near the border with Kazakhstan, 2 more heavy silos groaned. The massive concrete covers, weighing hundreds of tons, were blown aside by explosive bolts. 2 more RS-28 Sarmat missiles erupted from the earth. This was the second wave. These missiles were not aimed west toward Europe. They were aimed north. They were designed to fly over the North Pole and approach North America from the one direction, where the American radar coverage was most prone to gaps. A Russian launch officer monitored the burn. "Second wave is away. Boosters are nominal. Trajectory is programmed for the high-latitude skim. Time to apogee is 90 seconds, 7:25 in the evening. The warning board at the North American Aerospace Defense Command flashed a new color, purple. This was the color for multiple source launches. The threat was no longer coming from a single site. It was a coordinated, multi-axis event. The commander of the watch looked at the new lines appearing on the map. They just opened up the Siberian fields. We have 3 more heavy boosters in the air. This is a full-scale launch. The strategic analyst shook his head. Sir, look at the telemetry. The Siberian birds are doing the same thing. They are leveling off. They are not going into high ballistic arcs. They are hugging the ionosphere. The commander leaned over the table. They aren't aiming for the cities. If they wanted to kill millions of people, they would have fired hundreds of missiles on standard arcs. This is something else. They are targeting the sky itself. A silence fell over the room. The realization was more terrifying than a standard attack. The realization was more terrifying than a standard attack. A standard attack had a logic. This had none. It was a strategic enigma. The analyst pointed to the screen. Sir, the first wave is passing over Iceland. They are starting to emit a secondary pulse. It is a high-frequency burst. It is designed to interact with the magnetic field of the Earth. The commander grabbed the phone. This is not a nuclear strike. This is a total atmospheric disruption. They are trying to turn the sky into a weapon. The tracking lines continued to crawl across the digital map. The world was 6 minutes away from the first interaction. The tension had moved, past fear. It was now a cold, mechanical dread. The situation was no longer a crisis. It was an evolution. 7:26 in the evening. The White House. The President of the United States was moving through the underground corridors of the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. Beside him, a military aide carried the black leather briefcase known as the football. It contained the digital triggers for the nuclear triad. The air in the bunker was cool and smelled of ozone. The president took his seat at the center of a long mahogany table. Monitors lined every wall. He looked at the Secretary of Defense on the screen. Status. The secretary spoke clearly. We have declared Defense Readiness Condition 2. This is the highest alert level since 1962. Our strategic bombers are in the air. Our ballistic missile submarines are moving to launch depth. The Russians have 7 heavy boosters in flight. All are following the same atmospheric skim trajectory. Do we have a target? The president asked. Negative, sir, the secretary replied. They are staying at 98 kilometers. They are essentially orbiting the planet at hypersonic speeds. They can stay in this mode for another 20 minutes before they either burn up or descend. 7:27 in the evening. Vandenberg Space Force Base, California. On the rugged coastline of the Pacific, the heavy steel lids of the ground-based interceptor silos slid open. These were the only weapons capable of hitting a target in the high atmosphere. The crews inside the Launch Control Center were typing at high speed. Their hands were steady, but their eyes were fixed on the SPECH countdown clocks. A launch officer spoke into his headset. Fire control is locked. We have a solution on the first wave. We are ready to intercept over the Arctic. The commander of the battery held the launch key. Hold. We do not have authorization to fire. We are waiting for a positive identification of the warhead type. Sir, the officer said. If we wait until they descend, the intercept window closes. We have 60 seconds to launch if we want to hit at the apogee. The commander did not move. We hold. If we shoot down a Russian missile over international waters, we are the ones who started the war. We wait. 7:29 in the evening. A command bunker deep beneath the Ural Mountains. General Gerasimov stood in front of a digital map that covered the entire far wall. He was the chief of the general staff. He was a man of cold logic and deep strategic patience. He watched the American Tonner response on a secondary screen. He saw the American interceptors at Vandenberg and Fort Greely power up their radars. His adjutant spoke. The Americans have moved to DEFCON 2. Their interceptors are ready. They are within the engagement window. Gerasimov nodded slowly. They are professional. They are waiting for the pivot. They want to know what is inside the shroud. And if they fire early? The adjutant asked. Then the gamble fails, Gerasimov said. But they will not fire. They know that a single interceptor launch will trigger our entire shore-based battery. They are looking for a reason not to start the end of the world. We are about to give them 1. The general checked his watch. The first wave was now crossing the magnetic North Pole. The thin air was glowing with the heat of the gliding missiles. The friction was intense. The metal skins of the gliders were beginning to soften. It was time for the next phase. The world was balanced on a razor. Both sides had their fingers on the trigger. Neither side wanted to pull it. 7:30 in the evening. The edge of the atmosphere. The first RS-28 glider was now a glowing needle of fire. It was traveling at 7 kilometers per second. At this speed, the thin molecules of oxygen and nitrogen were being stripped of their electrons. A layer of ionized gas surrounded the vehicle. This was the plasma sheath. It acted as a shield against most conventional radar. Inside the National Military Command Center, a scientist addressed the Secretary of Defense. Sir, the vehicle is using a technique called aerodynamic lift. It is bouncing off the denser air below it. It is like a stone skipping across a pond. This allows it to stay at 98 kilometers indefinitely. The Secretary watched the sensor data. Is it stable? It is incredibly stable, the scientist replied. But the heat is building. The skin temperature is over 2,000 degrees. It should be melting, yet it continues to accelerate. 7:31 in the evening. High above the Bering Sea, a United States Air Force RC-135 Cobra Ball aircraft flew a lonely orbit. Its massive infrared telescopes were pointed at the horizon. The flight crew watched their displays with growing alarm. The sensor operator spoke to the pilot. "Captain, I have a broad-spectrum emission from the lead contact. It is a high-energy microwave burst." The pilot responded. "Confirm the signature." "Is it a jammer?" "Negative," the operator said. "It is not jamming. It is a pulse. The frequency matches the initial phase of a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. If that warhead detonates, it will burn out every satellite in low Earth orbit." The pilot gripped the controls. "Relay that to Strategic Command. Now, 7:33 in the evening. Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. 2 F-22 Raptor fighters roared off the runway. Their afterburners were 2 blue diamonds in the twilight. They were climbing towards 60,000 feet. They carried long-range air-to-air missiles. Their mission was to reach the highest possible altitude and wait. The lead pilot spoke to the controller. "Guardian 1, we are passing 45,000 feet, requesting clearance for the high-altitude engagement zone." The controller responded. "Guardian 1, you are cleared for the zone. Weapon systems are hot. You are authorized to engage any descending contact. Do not wait for a confirmed target. If it drops below 80 kilometers, kill it." The pilots leveled off at 65,000 feet. The sky above them was turning black. The stars were visible. 7 hypersonic gliders were crossing the world. They were silent. They were deadly. And they were about to reach the point of no return. The board at Cheyenne Mountain was now a solid mass of flashing lights. Every defensive asset in the northern region was active. The interceptors were in place. The radars were locked. The computers were counting down to the first possible engagement. The world was holding its breath. The moment of impact was seconds away. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:34 in the evening. The National Military Command Center. The Secretary of Defense spoke into his secure headset. "Mr. President, the first wave is crossing the fail-safe line. We have 60 seconds before they are beyond our intercept capability. I am requesting immediate authorization to engage." The President did not hesitate. "Authorize the launch. Engage the first wave." The order flashed through the high-speed fiber optic cables to Alaska. At Fort Greely, the ground groaned. A ground-based interceptor erupted from its silo. 7:34 and 15 seconds. It was a white streak against the dark sky. A second followed, then a third. The interceptors were climbing at 4 miles per second. They were aimed at a point in space where the first Russian glider would be in 1 minute. Inside the interceptor nose cone, the kinetic kill vehicle woke up. It was a sophisticated computer with small rocket thrusters. It did not need an explosion. It would kill the Russian missile with speed and mass. 7:34 and 30 seconds. The Russian command bunker was silent. General Gerasimov watched the American interceptors on his screen. They were small green dots closing the gap. The Americans have committed, Gerasimov said. They are firing their kinetic shield. His adjutant looked at the clock. Sir, the lead glider is within the kill zone. Release the payload, Gerasimov commanded. 7:34 and 45 seconds. 98 kilometers above the Earth, the lead Russian glider received the signal. The aerodynamic skin of the vehicle did not fall away. It exploded outward in a controlled burst. The American interceptor was 10 miles away. Its infrared eye was locked on the heat. It was moving too fast to see the change. 7:35 in the evening. The Russian glider did not release nuclear warheads. It released a cloud of specialized material. Millions of tiny, ultra-thin filaments of aluminized mylar. Thousands of high-speed metallic foil strips. The cloud expanded instantly in the near vacuum of the upper atmosphere. It was a silver wall 5 miles wide. It was a mirror in the sky. The American kinetic kill vehicle struck the cloud. It was like a bullet hitting a wall of sand. The speed of the interceptor was its own enemy. The impact with the thin foil at Mach 20 was enough to shred the interceptor into dust. The second interceptor hit the cloud seconds later. It disintegrated. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, the radar screens suddenly changed. The clear tracks of the Russian missiles vanished. In their place was a massive, shimmering bloom of white noise. The commander of the watch stood up. I have lost track. All sensors are blinded. What is happening? The sky is gone, sir, the operator replied. Everything north of the 72nd parallel just went dark. 7:36 in the evening, Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. The main display was a wall of static. The billion-dollar radar arrays of the North Warning System were useless. The high-altitude foil cloud was reflecting every pulse back into the ground. It was an electronic whiteout. For the first time in 40 years, the United States was blind to a ballistic threat coming over the pole. The commander of the watch gripped the edge of his desk. Report! Do we have any eyes on those gliders? Negative, sir, the technician shouted. The ionosphere is saturated. The foil is catching the solar wind. It is creating a massive electrical charge. I have 500 incoming contacts on the screen. None of them are real. The commander turned to the officer at the tactical link. Are the interceptors still in the air? They are gone, sir. The kill vehicles cannot find a heat source in that cloud. We are totally vulnerable. 7:36 and 15 seconds. The Russian command bunker. General Gerasimov was not celebrating. He was staring at his own telemetry screen. The green lines representing the 7 gliders were beginning to wobble. They were losing their steady Mach 22 velocity. An engineer stood up, his voice trembling. General, we have a critical atmospheric anomaly. The foil cloud is not dispersing as predicted. The electrical discharge from the ionosphere is arcing back to the gliders. It is stripping away their thermal shielding. Gerasimov leaned forward. Explain. What does that mean for the trajectory? It means we have lost aerodynamic control, the engineer replied. The gliders are no longer skipping. They are tumbling. They are beginning an uncontrolled descent over the North Atlantic. Gerasimov felt a cold weight in his chest. This was the pivot. The demonstration was supposed to be a controlled show of force. It was supposed to prove that Russia could blind the American shield at will. It was never intended to drop 7 massive kinetic slugs onto European or American soil. Can we self-destruct? Gerasimov asked. The command link is severed by the ionization, the engineer said. They are dead weight now. They will hit the atmosphere in 3 minutes. We cannot choose where they land. 7:36 and 45 seconds. High above the Greenland ice sheet, the lead glider was no longer a precision instrument. It was a 10-ton block of scorching metal. As it hit the denser air at 80 kilometers, the tumbling motion created a massive, pulsing friction. It began to glow a brilliant, terrifying violet. It was visible from the ground for hundreds of miles. To an observer on a fishing boat in the North Atlantic, it looked like a star was falling. Inside the American and Russian command centers, the realization hit simultaneously. The technology had exceeded the math. The high-altitude environment had reacted in a way no computer model had predicted. The two greatest military powers on Earth were now staring at the same nightmare. 7 unidentified, uncontrollable, and potentially nuclear objects were falling out of a blinded sky. No one knew where they would strike. No one knew if the other side would see the impact as an accident or the first shot of a war. The silence in the bunkers was absolute. The machines had done their work. Now, it was down to the men. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:37 in the evening. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center. The president stared at the wall of static on the main monitor. The room was deathly quiet, except for the hum of the air filtration system. He looked at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The president spoke first. "We are blind. How long until we have a track?" The chairman adjusted his glasses. "The foil is beginning to drift south, sir. But the electrical interference is still at peak levels. We have space-based infrared sensors picking up thermal blooms over the Atlantic. They are not engines. They are re-entry streaks. The vehicles are falling. Are they falling on us?" The chairman checked a tablet. Current projection puts the first 3 impacts in the North Atlantic. 2 more are tracking toward the Greenland coast. The last 2 are unknown. If they maintain their current speed, they will hit the water in 4 minutes. 7:38 in the evening. The National Military Command Center. A red light began to pulse on the primary communications console. It was the Washington to Moscow direct communications link, the hotline. It had not been used for a crisis of this magnitude in decades. The Secretary of Defense grabbed the handset. "This is the National Military Command Center. We are standing by for the Kremlin." The voice of a Russian translator came through. It was calm but rapid. "This is a Priority 1 message from the Chief of the General Staff to the Secretary of Defense. General Gerasimov is on the line. He is declaring a technical emergency. He states that the 7 flight vehicles launched from Plesetsk and Dombarovsky have suffered a total loss of control." The secretary signaled for the president to be patched into the call.
What do you mean by
"Continue. What is the nature of the payload?" The translator spoke for Gerasimov. "The general states the vehicles are not armed. They are carrying inert ballast and electronic foil canisters. They were intended for a high-altitude demonstration of atmospheric denial. The electrical interaction with the ionosphere was not predicted. The gliders are tumbling. We cannot self-destruct. We are transmitting the last known telemetry data now." 7:39 in the evening. Cheyenne Mountain. The static on the radar screens began to tear. Holes appeared in the white noise as the foil cloud dispersed into the lower, denser atmosphere. The massive computers at the base of the mountain crunched the new data. The tracking officer called out, "I have firm track on contact 1 and 2. They are breaking up. The thermal signature is expanding. They are not warheads. They are disintegrating."
Target the central mass. I want trajectory.
The commander of the watch leaned in. "What about the others?" "Contact 3 is a large debris field. It will impact 500 miles east of Newfoundland. Contact 4 and 5 are tracking toward empty ice in northern Greenland. Contacts 6 and 7 are still high, but they are slowing down. They are falling at Mach 10 and dropping fast." 7:40 in the evening. The Pentagon. The data from the Russian telemetry arrived. It matched the American radar tracks. The tension in the room did not vanish, but it changed shape. The fear of a nuclear exchange was replaced by the professional focus of a salvage and recovery operation. The Secretary of Defense spoke into the hotline. "General Gerasimov, we have your data. We have confirmed the tracks. Our interceptors have been ordered to stand down, but you have violated our airspace with heavy kinetic objects. This is not a small matter. The translator responded for the Russian general. The general understands. We are grounding all further flights of the Sarmat system. We are requesting a joint commission to analyze the atmospheric data. We did not intend to blind your eyes. We intended to show you that the sky belongs to no one. The secretary hung up the phone. He looked at the monitors. The red lines were gone. In their place were 7 small white circles, marking the impact points in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic and the ice of Greenland. The blind minute was over. The world was still there, but the trust that had held the peace for 80 years had been shredded as easily as the foil in the sky. 7:41 in the evening. The North Atlantic Ocean, 500 miles east of Newfoundland. The lead glider entered the dense air of the lower atmosphere. It was no longer a weapon of precision. It was a jagged piece of white-hot tungsten and steel. It struck the surface of the ocean at 8,000 miles per hour. The kinetic energy was equivalent to several tons of high explosives. A massive pillar of steam and seawater erupted into the night sky. There was no flash of nuclear fire. There was no radiation spike. There was only the raw, physical violence of mass hitting water. On the sonar arrays of a nearby Virginia-class submarine, the sound was deafening. It was a sharp, metallic crack that echoed through the deep trenches of the Atlantic. 7:42 in the evening. The National Military Command Center. The Secretary of Defense watched the satellite confirmation. A thermal bloomed on the screen, then faded into the cold blue of the ocean. Contact 1 is down, the Secretary said. Confirm no nuclear signature. A radiation specialist checked his sensors. Confirmed. No ionizing radiation detected. It was a kinetic impact only. Sensors in Greenland are reporting similar results for contacts 4 and 5. They hit the inland ice sheet. No casualties reported. The president looked at the board. What about the last 2? Contacts 6 and 7. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs pointed to the final pair of dots. They were slowing down over the Norwegian Sea. The Russians were telling the truth. They triggered a remote termination sequence. The gliders are breaking apart. They will burn up before they hit the water. 7:43 in the evening. The Russian command bunker. General Gerasimov sat back in his chair. He watched the final telemetry signals flicker and die. The gamble was over. He had shown the Americans that their missile shields could be neutralized by a cloud of foil, but he had also learned that the atmosphere was not a laboratory. It was a chaotic system that could turn a demonstration into a catastrophe in seconds. He turned to his adjutant. Send a formal notice to the Americans. All RS-28 units are returning to standby status. The experiment is concluded. Shall we mention the atmospheric data? The adjutant asked. No, Gerasimov said. They have their own sensors. They saw what happened. They know as well as we do that the next time, no one will be able to tell the difference between a test and a strike. 7:45 in the evening. The White House. The president stood up from the conference table. The weight of the last 35 minutes was visible in the lines on his face. He looked at the Secretary of Defense. Lower the alert status to Defense Readiness Condition 3, the president ordered. I want a full report on the foil cloud. If they can blind our radars that easily, our entire strategic posture is obsolete. We need a countermeasure before they launch another one. The secretary nodded. We are already coordinating with the Space Force. But sir, the Russians have made their point. They didn't need to hit a city. They just needed to show us that they could take away our sight. The room began to clear. The immediate threat of nuclear war had evaporated. In its place was a new, colder reality. The high-altitude skim had proven that the gap between peace and total destruction was only 98 kilometers wide. The crisis was resolving, but the silence that followed was not one of relief. It was the silence of a new arms race beginning in the dark. 7:46 in the evening. The National Military Command Center. The primary display at the Pentagon began to reset. The jagged white noise of the electronic interference was fading. In its place, the familiar grid of the Northern Hemisphere reappeared. The massive foil cloud was falling into the lower atmosphere. It was burning up in the friction of the thicker air. The electronic blackout was over. The Secretary of Defense watched as the green icons for the American interceptors turned gray. They were returning to their bases in Alaska and California. The immediate threat of a nuclear exchange had passed, but the room remained quiet. There was no cheering. There were no handshakes. The people in this room knew how close they had come to a sequence of events that could not be reversed. 7:51 in the evening. A Russian Northern Fleet cruiser in the Barents Sea. The captain of the Peter the Great stood on the bridge. He watched the horizon through heavy binoculars. High above, the violet streaks of the falling gliders had vanished. The sky was once again a deep and empty black. The communications officer approached him. "Sir, we have received the stand-down order from the General Staff. The experimental phase is over. We are to resume standard patrol patterns." The captain lowered his binoculars. "Did the Americans fire?" "3 interceptors, sir," the officer replied. All 3 were neutralized by the foil screen. Their thermal sensors could not penetrate the cloud. The captain looked out at the dark water. Then the test was a success. "We have proven that their shield is a wall of glass, and they have proven they will break it if they feel threatened. It is a dangerous day for everyone." 7:55 in the evening. Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. The commander of the watch sat back in his high-backed chair. His uniform was damp with sweat. He looked at the tracking officer. "Give me a final status on the impacts." The officer checked his screen. 5 kinetic impacts confirmed. 3 in the North Atlantic. 2 on the Greenland ice sheet. The final 2 vehicles were destroyed by remote command over the Norwegian Sea. No secondary explosions. No radiation. The airspace is clear. The commander nodded. "Change the alert status. Move us back to Defense Readiness Condition 3. Notify all sectors." The event is concluded. The officer typed the command. Across the global network of the United States military, the red warning lights dimmed to yellow. The tension began to bleed out of the room. Technicians began to save their data logs. Analysts started the long process of reconstructing the timeline. 8 o'clock in the evening. The world was returning to its normal rotation. In Washington, the president was preparing to address the nation. In Moscow, the Kremlin was drafting a press release about a successful scientific test of atmospheric phenomena. But inside the command centers, the mood was grim. The professional soldiers and analysts knew the truth. The rules of strategic warfare had been rewritten in 40 minutes. The high-altitude skim was no longer a theory. It was a demonstrated capability. The crisis had resolved. The missiles were gone. The sky was clear. But the sense of security that had existed an hour ago was gone forever. The officers at their consoles didn't feel like winners. They felt like survivors. 11:15 in the evening. The Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. The crisis had moved from the operations floor to the conference rooms of the A-Ring. The adrenaline of the launch was gone. It was replaced by the cold, analytical dread of the aftermath. On the secure tables lay the first printed frames of the satellite imagery from the North Atlantic. A senior intelligence officer pointed to a grainy image of the splashdown site. The kinetic energy was off the charts. "We are looking at a crater on the ocean floor 200 meters wide. If that had hit a carrier strike group or a coastal city, the damage would have been indistinguishable from a small nuclear device." The Secretary of Defense rubbed his eyes. "What is the consensus on the foil cloud? Was it a defensive screen or a weapon?" "It was both, sir," the officer replied. "Our technical teams have analyzed the residue collected by the high-altitude sampling aircraft. It was not just aluminum. It was a polymer coated in a rare earth isotope. It was specifically tuned to the frequency of our X-band radars. It didn't just block the signal. It absorbed it and re-radiated it as heat. It turned the entire upper atmosphere into a thermal wall. Our interceptors were blind because the sky itself became a giant heat source." The secretary looked at the report. "So our entire mid-course defense system is vulnerable to a few hundred pounds of specialized plastic." "Essentially, yes. The Russians have proven that they can create a blind spot the size of a continent in less than 10 minutes. 3 days later, Brussels, Belgium. The North Atlantic Council met in an emergency session. The atmosphere was one of quiet fury. The representatives of the European nations had watched the Russian missiles overfly their territory with total impunity. The sovereign airspace of Norway, Denmark, and the United Kingdom had been violated at an altitude that technically sat on the border of outer space. The Russian ambassador sat at the far end of the table. He remained expressionless as the list of grievances was read. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was measured. The Russian Federation regrets the technical malfunction of the experimental gliders. However, the Russian Federation does not recognize the 98-kilometer altitude as sovereign territory. We were operating in international atmospheric space. The test was a scientific exploration of the ionosphere. The fact that your radar systems were unable to track a scientific instrument is a matter for your own engineers. The American representative leaned forward. A scientific instrument does not travel at Mach 22 on an unpredictable trajectory. You launched a heavy intercontinental missile on a path designed to bypass our early warning systems. You blinded our eyes and dropped 10 tons of metal into our shipping lanes. This was not a test. It was a threat. The threat is in your perception, the Russian replied. We have merely demonstrated that the old ways of maintaining security are no longer valid. The shield you built is now a liability. We suggest a new dialogue on strategic stability. The meeting ended without a resolution. Outside the headquarters, the world was moving on. The news cycle was already shifting to other stories. The public had been told that a Russian satellite launch had suffered a minor orbital decay. The truth of the blind minute was buried under layers of classification and diplomatic protocol. But in the military academies and the command bunkers, the lesson was clear. The rules had changed. The high-altitude skim had proven that the gap between peace and war was not a distance on a map. It was a measurement of time and light, and for 40 minutes, both had belonged to the other side. The tactical aftermath was complete. The strategic fallout was only beginning. 1 week later, the National War College, Washington, District of Columbia. The lecture hall was filled with senior officers from every branch of the military. They sat in silence as a retired general stood at the lectern. On the screen behind him was a single image of a silver filament. It was a microscopic strand of the foil recovered from the Greenland ice sheet. The general spoke in a low, authoritative tone. What we witnessed 7 days ago was the end of the ballistic era. For 60 years, the peace was held. By the predictable physics of a high-altitude arc, we knew where the missiles were. We knew where they were going. We had 20 minutes to decide the fate of the planet. He paused, looking out at the rows of uniforms. That certainty is gone. The RS-28 launch proved that a heavy-lift vehicle can hug the ionosphere. It can maneuver. It can deploy a screen that turns our billion-dollar sensors into scrap metal. The blind minute was not a technical failure. It was a strategic demonstration. The foreign forces showed us that they can reach into our eyes and turn out the lights. A colonel in the front row raised his hand. Sir, what is the tactical takeaway? How do we counter an atmospheric skim? We don't, the general replied simply. Not yet. We are entering a period of strategic instability that we haven't seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. When the sensor data disappears, the decision to launch a retaliatory strike moves from a computer to a human being. The margin for error has dropped to zero. Strategic assessment. The Defense Headquarters Facility. In the final report on the event, the incident was labeled the Apogee Gambit. The analysts concluded that the foreign military had achieved its primary objective. They had forced military personnel to acknowledge that the traditional missile shield was no longer a guarantee of safety. The world was moving toward a new doctrine. Some called it mutually assured blindness. The report noted that the most critical moment of the entire crisis was not the launch of the interceptors. It was the decision by the commander at the underground command center to hold his fire during the second wave. It was a human choice, made in the absence of data. It was the refusal to let the machines dictate the end of the world. 1 week after the launch, the skies over the North Pole were clear. The foil had long since settled into. The deep currents of the Atlantic or merged with the ancient ice of Greenland. To the casual observer, the atmosphere was as it had always been, a thin, fragile blue shell protecting a crowded world. Final thought. The history of warfare is often a story of technology, outstripping the wisdom of those who use it. The high-altitude skim was a reminder that the most advanced weapons are still guided by the same human fears and calculations that have governed conflict for centuries. No missiles flew in anger. No ships were lost. But the architecture of global security shifted. When the line was crossed, both sides chose restraint over reflex. They realized that in a world of hypersonic speeds and electronic shadows, there are no winners. Modern warfare is decided, not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The morning was quiet once again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence of a world that had seen the edge and decided to step back. For now,